I am often asked, what do you mean when you say at MARKINC Ministries that God is sovereign and you can trust Him? Well, we believe that God is indeed the one who filters all of our suffering through His hands. In other words, nothing happens to you or to me by chance or fate or mistake that isn't first filtered through the loving and caring hands of our God. Well, that's one thing to say that. It's another thing to actually act that out in the midst of suffering, in the midst of heartache. I remember when we lost our son, Mark, and I was at the hospital holding his dead body. I looked to the heavens and I said, Lord, I don't know. You can't fix this. This is not something that you can fix. This is not something that can be repaired. My heart is broken, and I don't think you can ever heal that heart. And friends, I got to tell you, there is no suffering, there is no heartache so great as losing a loved one. And yet, my God and your God knows that feeling. God the Father turned His back on His only Son and allowed Him to die on that cross for you and for me, when He could have delivered Him from that cross, even amidst the screams of, my God, why have you forsaken me? God the Father turned His back on His only Son for you and for me. Well, one day the Apostle Paul was involved in a controversy with the Corinthian church. You see, the Corinthian Christians were extremely gifted in many ways. They had a lot of talent in that church. And many of them began to question the Apostle Paul's credentials to be an apostle and to be the spiritual leader of a movement in their area. And Paul, in defending himself, talks about an experience that he had, which is recorded for us in the book of Acts. And we are told in that particular story, as Paul was traveling between a city called Derbe and a city called Lystra, he was stoned by his enemies and left for dead. He had what we would call today an out-of-the-body experience. For all intents and purposes, he was dead. And so in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, he references that story to these Corinthian Christians who were questioning whether or not he had legitimate credentials to be an apostle. And he makes this statement that comes from the lips of God Himself, but a statement that we Christians for many years, I don't know about you, but I have as well, we misinterpret exactly what this verse says. He says that God said to him, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. My power is made perfect in weakness. Now, we're told today that no matter what it is you think you can do, you can just go ahead and do it if you just put your mind to it. Well, that's just not true. You know that, and I know that. There are some things we simply cannot do. But Paul here talks about strength in the midst of weakness. That in the middle of pain, in the middle of sorrow, there is weakness. In the middle of that same weakness, there is power. How can that be? Well, while Paul was being stoned on Lystra's road, on the road to Derbe, he died. And he tells us in this passage that he was taken up into the third heaven. And there he was shown things that none of us have ever seen. This is a true out-of-the-body experience where he is experiencing the place that we call heaven. Now, when God sent him back to the earth, He gave him instructions that he was not to speak of this. He is not to say to anyone what he saw, what he experienced there. He was to keep himself silent. In fact, in order to ensure that the Apostle Paul would not speak of what he saw in that third heaven, he was given, as he calls it, a thorn in the flesh. Some sort of malady. Maybe it was the direct result of the stoning that he took. Some people think that Paul was blind or going blind. Some think that he had a hearing problem. Some think that he had a severe arthritic condition. We just don't know. All we know is that it was painful. And it reminded him every single day of what he saw, so that his eyes can be fixed on the goal, fixed on the prize. And that prize is the coming of God's kingdom to earth and our eternal salvation in heaven. And in that context, Paul says that in my weakness, God's strength is made perfect. And so, friend, I challenge you that if you are struggling right now, if you are suffering, if you are wondering whether or not God cares, if you are wondering how in the world can He become strong in my weakness, you need to get your eyes on the prize. You need to get your eyes on the goal. You need to be reminded of the fact that this world in which we live is broken, it is fallen, and every time suffering comes your way, every time you experience pain and heartache, it is to remind you, that thorn in the flesh is to remind you of what God has prepared for you. This is not our home. This is not where we are meant to be. We are meant to be in His presence. And while we travel through this world, while we experience that suffering, that heartache, that brokenness, those are little reminders. Those are the thorns in the flesh. Those are the thorns in the side that continually remind us to look up, for behold, your day of redemption draws near. And so my prayer for you is that you will find God's strength in whatever weakness you are experiencing, and to Him be the glory.